Good morning to everybody on the call. We've got an incredible number of people joining us from right across Ballarat and the region this morning. So thank you for taking the time to join us, and thank you, of course, to our special guest, the Honourable Minister Jaala Pulford. Can I start off by just introducing myself? My name's Stuart Benjamin. I'm a businessman based in Ballarat, but I also have the pleasure of chairing the Minister's Small Business Ministerial Council for Victoria. And thank you to our friends at Commerce Ballarat for the opportunity to speak with you today. So this morning's webinar is brought to you as part of the Federation Business School Connect, Evolve, Recover 2020 event, and thanks to Fed for their continued support of small business and of Commerce Ballarat. Of course, as we always do, I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, and today I'm sitting on Wathaurong people country, and I know we've got people joining us from all over, so I acknowledge their elders past and present, and in particular as well as the spirits of their ancestors who are among us. So thank you. So also very pleased to acknowledge a number of councillors who are joining us today. Councillor Ben Taylor, Councillor Jim Rinaldi, and Councillor Samantha McIntosh. Thank you for joining us and for your continued support of small business. And we're all been noting with interest with council elections coming up. I see, Ben, that you've recently re-nominated for your position. So good luck to all the councillors doing that. I think it's going to be a bit of a cast of thousands. So we're in for an interesting couple of months. Can I also just run through our sponsors today, because we have a number of ongoing sponsors and many of them joining us today. And of course, Fed Business School, and hello to Helen, who I think is joining us, as well as a number of their team members there. And you've got your new VC, Duncan, who's already out there and certainly making direct engagement with the community, which is wonderful to see. Central Highlands Water, we've got Beck and Stephen joining us, and Beck also on the board of Commerce. Ballarat Technology Park, where I'm sitting today to make this call. Nevitz, Ballarat Foundation. G'day to Andy, who I think recently found out that in my RDA role, we've got some spare money, so he's been my new stalker. The Grow Ballarat team, hello Rob. Ballarat Volkswagen, Radio Ballarat, I think Fitzy's able to join us for the first part of this meeting. Runway Ballarat and the team there, and Nicola, thank you. Ad Media, my team at RDA Grampians, Ian and the team at Mercure Ballarat. Certainly one of our more high-profile businesses that are really struggling at the moment, and thanks, Ian, for the work that you're doing to support the hospitality sector. See, Ballarat Times is a supporter of this, but they're pretty busy. Al's putting the current issue to bed, so to describe is the way he described it to me. So he's not joining us today, as well as Win Ballarat and of course the City of Ballarat. So a very warm welcome to our guest speaker today. I've often said in this forum and others that she probably has one of the harder jobs in government at the moment, and probably one of the bigger challenges. And we know that small business is going to be the sector that is going to pull Victoria out of the COVID hole, and it's a great pleasure to welcome the Honourable Jaala Pulford to join us today. Good morning, Jaala.
Morning, Stuart. Thanks, and good morning, everyone. Also would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered, and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging here on Wathaurong country, but also wherever anybody else joining us today is. It's Jodie and the team at Commerce Ballarat, to your board and members. Thanks for having me along today. When we put this in the diary maybe a month ago, not long after I came into the new portfolios, we didn't know it would be like 2 days after the roadmap was released. And so plan was to talk to you about some of the various supports and things that the government's doing to support small business through what is a profound economic shock. Like, there's no other way to describe it. I'm not sure there's a soul on the planet that hasn't had their life fair and square turned on their heads. And you know, I know all of you are no exception to that rule, and I know that some of you have been in a sector that's perhaps been a little protected. Others are in sectors that are at the very front line of the rules that are keeping us safe and slowing the spread. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And to, I think Jodie sent me the list of who's attending. I think if I could see you, I would have a lot of familiar faces in the room, because you all work and operate in the community that I call home. And so, you know, some of you I know quite well, some of your businesses I know quite well, you know, as a patron or as a customer, others, you know, just because we share the same community and live together. So, like, we do recognise that this is just an incredibly, incredibly challenging year for everyone. And it's not really just a year, is it? Because until there's a broad-based vaccine that is effective, the way that we all live our lives is changed, and changed significantly. I spent 4 years, as a number of you would know, as the Minister for Agriculture and Regional Development, first term of our government. And in 4 years in the agriculture portfolio, we had drought twice and one almighty dairy crisis where the dairy price crashed well below the price of production. And so I spent lots of time talking to people in business throughout that period about, you know, the extraordinary hardship that they were experiencing at the time. And I reflect on that a lot at the moment, because the thing is, with drought, to a point, to a fair point, you can plan for it. It's a regular part of the Australian business, farming business landscape. And, you know, when it's particularly severe or particularly prolonged, there's a need for some assistance from government, but it's the kind of thing that you build into your financial planning and your business planning. A pandemic, the likes of which hasn't been seen for 100 years, no one can plan for. No question of skill or business acumen or planning could have foreseen that the way that we live our lives and the consequences that that has for your businesses would be so profoundly changed. And I often also think about back in February, late January and February, when I had responsibility for our fishing and boating, a lot of recreational stuff, but also the commercial side. And the commercial fishing, the abalone businesses in Gippsland and in southwest Victoria were on the phone saying, hey, we've just lost access to China. Like 90% of our customers gone overnight. What can we do about that? And anyway, we were able to roll over their quota and give them a bit of relief. And as it turned out, it happened to be at almost, you know, I mean, didn't feel like this at the time, but you couldn't have picked a better time of the year to be sort of January, February, because at the end of the year. And, you know, when we go to Parliament and everybody had traipsed into the Chinese restaurants and, you know, take photos and sort of stand in solidarity with the Chinese community and the Chinese restaurants that were kind of experiencing this shock back in February. And you know, and it seemed so, I guess, so hopeful or so optimistic or so absent understanding what it was really all going to be like and how it was coming to us then, to be sort of reflecting on, oh, gee, this is tough for the seafood industry, and gee, those Chinese restaurants are taking a, you know, a real belting, and just so hard. But like then, you know, what felt like about 5 minutes later, you know, by mid-March, we're going into lockdown ourselves. The things that we'd seen in Spain and in northern Italy and in the areas around Wuhan on our TV screens were suddenly our lived reality. So it's, you know, so I, you know, I don't imagine the kind of decisions you're having to make and the hardships that you're dealing with, and also juggling all the other aspects of your life in addition to your businesses, kids at home, kinder's closed, childcare on and off, caring for family members, having friends of family, or even yourself living alone, and the challenges of stay-home rules have meant not being able to see people in the Melbourne bubble for months and months on end. And of course, you know, I think perhaps the most brutal of all the restrictions, you know, having to pick 5 or 10 people to go to a funeral. is perhaps the worst of it of all. Anyway, so as you know, our government has been providing support to business community along the way at different points where different restrictions have come in. It runs to the many billions of dollars. We're now sort of, I think, closer to $11 billion than $10 billion in terms of economic supports. And some of you, particularly in construction and trades, might have been the beneficiary of some of those projects that were fast-tracked, like right across our region, things that might have been in a budget in a year or two's time. They were all sort of kicked into gear and funded earlier. Public housing works, school building projects, community civic works, all kinds of things. And then also there's been the direct support to businesses as well. So grants for employing businesses and other supports for others. There's a mental health support program recognising that, I think, for people who are running a business as well as running a life in a pandemic, it's particularly challenging, and that what you need, both from business advisors and from mental health experts, is an understanding of both sides of that coin. So we've designed something that we hope will be hitting the mark there. St John Ambulance are providing the training for that. There was the payroll tax refunds that were done very quickly, liquor licensing, fee relief, rent relief for tenants in government buildings that might affect some of you, perhaps not too many. Government outstanding invoice payment policy shifted from a couple of months into 10 days. That put about $2 billion into the economy in about a week back in March. Different things for tourism accommodation providers as well, recognising the Melbourne lockdown affected cancellations, and the commercial tenancy relief scheme. We've legislation in the Parliament at the moment, went through the lower house last week, and we'll deal with it in the upper house, I think Tuesday of next week, which will extend the commercial tenancy relief scheme to December. It introduces a new requirement for rent reductions to be proportionate to income and to the loss, so the economic loss being experienced by the business. And for people who own those properties, they're not particularly happy with us about that, as you would expect. But I think we just need to give people some more time to trade through than was originally envisaged in March. So that was a March to September initiative. It's been extended to December, but we're building into the legislation the ability to kick it out to April if necessary. And it was good to see in the papers today the federal government have also extended the date for the insolvency laws relief as well. And, whilst I think all the commentators worry that there are vastly fewer insolvencies than ever before as a result of that, again, just giving people the time and the flexibility and the space to trade through is important. And of course, I think it's, we, pay due credit and recognise at every step of the way the immense financial contribution of the federal government with JobKeeper, like just a gem of an idea to create an ongoing nexus between the place of employment and the workforce, like quick, not perfect. Of course, you can't do anything on that scale quickly and perfectly, but, they've made a few refinements along the way. Very, very significant financial contribution by the federal government, and obviously they're doing a whole bunch of things as well. So here we are, roadmap for reopening, and I know people have lots of questions and stuff, so I'll try not to talk for too long.
And I should have said, Minister, we'll very interested here the programs and the interventions, but I think one of the reasons that we've got such a large number of people on the call today is obviously to hear about the roadmap. And so just for everybody who's on the call, we're using obviously the chat function for questions, so please fire them in. There's already a number of them that are sitting there, and I'll attempt to triage those. And we're going to have a good 20 odd minutes for questions towards the end of this call. So thank you.
And thanks, Stuart. And there are a couple that had come in advance as well. So I'll attempt to respond to those too. So I guess just quickly in terms of the couple that came through early, on business support fund applications, the criteria is on the Business Vic website. That means that some businesses haven't been eligible, but there are other supports that might be appropriate for those businesses. We are currently, I'm working with Treasurer and Minister for Industry Support and Recovery, like yesterday, today, tomorrow, on our next package of business support. The current round of business support fund finishes at the end, 14th of September, but we recognise and certainly hear loud and clear that there are some people, particularly non-employing businesses, that have fallen short of the eligibility for that. And
so how do businesses follow up on that? Yeah, so I mean, the first port of call is their professional services, their advisors, I suspect. Second port is probably commerce. I mean, we've got experts that sit in Commerce Ballarat who can give you advice on programs, and particularly not missing out on programs. Is the third step your office? I mean, is that?
So the business support hotline. So we've got all those extra people trained up, able to answer all the questions. They don't provide individual business advice. They provide advice on what the policies and programs are. If people have got individual circumstances that they want to take up with us offline, perhaps best either contact my Melbourne office or my Ballarat office, or if you want to, through the chat function, convey this to Jodie, and Jodie can give us a list if there are individual circumstances that need to be followed up. But one that has come up quite a bit is around round one from the Business Support Fund, where people have had a problem demonstrating eligibility, and then they've gone back to try and fix that problem, but the fund has been closed. I know nobody's going to like the answer to this question, but when the fund is closed, like it is closed, the funds in it are gone. And so that's...
I was one of those, Minister. So I appreciate that.
I'd encourage you to sort of look at what is open now and what is still available. And again, sort of, Premier's indicated, but hopefully by the end of the week, we'll be in a position to announce the next tranche of support and works on in earnest on that.
Would you mind, before we get into the other questions, would you mind maybe just talking a little bit about the roadmap?
No, definitely. Just the second question that we had also, there was a question about the public holiday.
Yes.
And just sort of responding to that, look, it's not our intention to cancel the public holiday on account of the pandemic. I recognise that that's not going to be popular in all quarters, in many, but that's, it's not a decision that's been made lightly or without any consideration of the consequences, but that decision's been made that we will not cancel the public holiday as it is in the schedule. Now, on the roadmap, so the simplest thing to do to avoid getting confused by a lot of information is to just look at the bit that applies to your own industry and to your own region. But for context, the regional roadmap has 4 steps. The Melbourne roadmap has 5. So our version has an entire column of restrictions that's not there. We will be in the second step from the 13th of September, which is this Sunday, so midnight this Sunday. So from next week, we'll be straight into the second step. The threshold, and I know this is the thing that perhaps has probably given rise to most confusion and unease, is how do we get from the second step to the third? Now, recognising in regional Victoria, there are a lot of businesses and a lot of industries that have been able to continue to operate under the stage 3 restrictions, as distinct from the Melbourne stuff, where huge numbers of industries have been required to be closed to limit the movement of people. Our third step, we think we will get to very, very quickly. We think we'll get to it, and I don't want to give anyone false hope, so let me heavily caveat this. But the modelling suggests we'll be there around the end of September. Now, you get an outbreak here, an outbreak there, and that can change, which is why it doesn't have a hard date on it. Conversely, the modelling tells us that we'll get to the third step in Melbourne late October. So quite a different trajectory from them. Again, yesterday's numbers were 41. Today, back north of 50, but it's sort of the average that is what we're looking at. So the threshold that we're waiting for to go to step 3 in regional Victoria is less than 5 new cases on average in regional Victoria over 14 days. Now, if any of you are kind of watching that Casey on the ABC who does the graphs every night, yesterday we were at 5 in regional Victoria. So we just have to not go backwards to get to our step 3. We need to kind of hold the current rate of transmission or improve on it over a couple of weeks, and then we're away and we're in.
But that seems the easier threshold to meet than the next one, which is the mystery cases. Would you agree?
No, our mystery cases are very low in regional Victoria. So that's not mystery cases in Melbourne, and we're not going to make regional Victoria wait until there's no community transmission in Melbourne. Through March, through April, May when we were all locked down, June when we started to ease up across the state, the point of difference between us and, say, New South Wales, other jurisdictions, has always been a higher rate of community transmission, and that's now very low in regional Victoria and getting lower every day in Melbourne. I mean, the thing is, a month ago we had days with 700, and now we're in the 50s. So it works. It is literally the only tool available to us while the scientists are still working on a vaccine. And the sooner that we get this suppressed down to very small numbers, the sooner we can start to return to some of those things that are so important to us all and that are critically important for your businesses.
So do we need to get to 0 mystery cases? Do we need to get to 0 mystery cases to go to that next step in regional, or is that only a Melbourne restriction?
No, just in regional. So we go to step 3 when we have no mystery cases and less than 5 total averaged over 2 weeks. And we think that that's only a few weeks away.
Okay. And so do we know, because I don't think we get published, what the mystery cases number is for regional at the moment? If that's got to get to 0, do we know what that number is at the moment?
I can't tell you that off the top of my head, but that stuff's all on the DHHS website and the data that's published every day. Postcode data. Various news sites break it down and rearrange it in different ways for people. The total numbers announced by the Department of Health every morning, and then usually a bit later, sort of early afternoon, they do the regional breakdown as that information becomes available. We won't have free travel between us and Melbourne until Melbourne gets to stage 3, and we've certainly been hearing loudly and clearly from regional communities that they're not that interested in having a whole lot of Melbourne people tripping up and down the highway while they've still got the high rate of infection. So the and then the various steps, I think I'll assume people are familiar with those being last step 23rd of November, and then COVID normal when we have no outbreaks. Again, Chief Health Officer and Premier said yesterday, if we can get to these places earlier, we will, but we know none of you will thank us for easing up too quickly and being back in lockdown again. It would be more horrific than the situation that we currently find ourselves in.
Yeah, and I think the modelling that's been done talked about that nearly 2/3 of the scenarios resulted in as having a yo-yo and a third breakout before Christmas. But I think it's fair to say that, you know, and a lot of the questions that are already coming through, and certainly the conversations that I'm having with friends and colleagues is, you know, why is regional Victoria lumped together as one entity? Has there been any discussion about potentially, you know, maybe carving out Geelong and Colac?
Yeah.
Or even using the bushfire regions, which are kind of a very well-established state government kind of control mechanism?
Yeah, look, we're certainly keeping an open mind about breaking regional Victoria down further, but I think we all need to recognise the movement in and around and between communities, and that's ultimately what this is about. Like the starting premise in the design of these roadmaps is how many people, like at what point does the movement of people stop the suppression effort? And so, you know, lots of industries, lots of communities have a very compelling and well put argument about why their activity is low risk, why their industry is low risk, why their setting, their town hasn't had, you know, and like these are all heard and understood. One of the key settings that the Chief Health Officer is, I guess, sort of insisting that this is all designed backward from is total movement of people. And so the total movement that we have in regional Victoria is substantially more than the total movement that people have in Melbourne at the moment. And for that, I guess we can, you know, awful as stage 3 is, we'd be thankful we got to avoid stage 4. But on the question of Geelong, Geelong's on a really close watch list, and by Geelong, we previously sort of identified Geelong, Greater Geelong, the 6 municipalities there. It's not our desire or our intention that the rest of regional Victoria be held from jumping into the 3rd step and the 4th step because Colac's still really problematic. I mean, the fact is the Colac community have done a pretty outstanding job, and the Colac, as I understand it, this is got a kind of 24-hour information on Colac, but that was one case that created 25. Yeah. So there's no community transmission, as I understand, in Colac, and so that's a good thing. They're all like the tracing, testing, it's catching them, and it's getting it contained and keeping it contained. But if Colac and Geelong are sort of ticking over at a higher rate, then we're really open to the idea of having the rest of regional Victoria go ahead as planned and just holding them back a little bit until their numbers are at the right spot.
So we all just want a workable solution. And you're right, none of us would want to see a third wave. Is the structure that the government's now setting up with the traffic light concept, that really is going to be a model that we're going to be operating on until we have a vaccine. So do you think that we will get to a point once we're a little bit more open where you will potentially have some regions that will move backwards and forwards within that traffic light system rather than the whole of regional Victoria?
Look, I think it's been, as we've designed it, I guess we've always been cognizant that if we're going to live with this till we're not, then having a framework that's flexible and adaptable will be helpful rather than having to redesign something every time there's an outbreak. So yeah, I guess the answer to that is yes.
Yeah, and I guess you're a proud regional Victorian. You live amongst in a regional location. You've been the Minister for Ag and Minister for Roads, but look, when I talk to friends in Mildura, the anger is just, it's white hot. It really is, and I just worry that we're starting to see divisions across regional Victoria where we've always been one community, and I'm starting to see us and them things happening between different regions, and it's really quite alarming.
Look, I think patience across the whole community is wearing really thin. Like this is just awful for everybody. And, you know, there was this great sort of sense of, you know, how good's this? We've got this all under control, one of the best performing places in the world, you know, second only to the New Zealanders almost. You know, and then we had a second wave and we had to do it all again. And I certainly think, you know, everybody that I spoke to, like you know, there's nothing that anyone's enjoying about any of this anymore. Like if there ever was, you know, like that kind of, there's moments where people were, you know, spending more time at home, and that sort of sourdough bread baking phenomenon, kind of, you know, teddy bears in the windows and chalk on the footpaths and stuff. I've been none of that a second time. Like it's just a hard and horrific grind, and people are missing their friends, and people are experiencing, you know, significant economic hardship. People who've put their, you know, heart and soul and every dollar they've got into their businesses for not just years, but like in some cases generations, and seeing all of that at risk. It's really, like, it's incredibly difficult. So we have, you know, but I think for the border communities, for a community like Mildura, for communities right across the border, as a whole other, it's a whole next level. The impositions from the South Australian government and the New South Wales government are, you know, like, I don't want to be too kind of incendiary, but like they were cruel. And there's been a lot of work, and Jacqueline's, you know, Jacqueline's been at this day and night, and, you know, the Premier's.
Right, that's Jacqueline Symes,
yeah,
the Minister for Regional Development
Minister now.
and Border.
Yeah, and we've worked with MPs of all sort of all colours and backgrounds across the borders. But those, like some of those stories coming out of that border communities are just horrendous. You know, kids not being able to get their health care. People can't get into medical, like the medical appointment stuff's been really bad. But just the day-to-day, like people not being able to just get to work. And a community like Albury-Wodonga, that's a wholly integrated community in every respect, it's just been horrendous. So some of that's quite a bit better now. Like they're, you know, back out 40 kilometres, I think, from 3. And the South Australian stuff's now much more compassionate, but that's just been horrendous. And Mildura, because of where they're located, you know, they've got a massive community of interest in South Australia and New South Wales, and I'm not at all surprised to hear that they're very unhappy.
Yeah, so could we maybe talk about some of the specific interventions, just because we've got a large number, particularly of hospitality operators who are on the call today. So as we move through the next steps, part of it is the provision, or the outdoor dining is going to be allowed. I was on a very frustrating call last night in my small business role with a number of people saying, well, you know, what are hospitality businesses complaining about? They're going to be allowed to do outdoor dining, that'll save them. And sadly for most venues, that's not going to, it's not going to be enough. And the end of November is a long time away. And I'll also encourage any of the councils who are on this call to immediately look at just completely relaxing your table and chair policy, and just allow every restaurant to activate outdoor dining, because they're going to need every help they can. I mean, what feedback are you getting from particular sectors where you think the touch points are going to be in terms of getting back and getting going?
Yeah, like I think that the roadmap has been disappointing for a lot of people, like deeply disappointing for many people, for 2 reasons, partly because it doesn't give people what they want, and also partly because it doesn't give people what they thought it might. And so, you know, I think there was a lot of hope that we get to the 14th of September. You know, like I've had emails from businesses that I'm on the personal email, my personal email, I'm on the email list for, who are sort of optimistically taking bookings in the hope, you know, and it was always, you know, oh, we're hoping we'll be back. And it's like, you know, and that hope is so important. It's not as important as cash flow, but it's pretty important. And, you know, and so I think people were very hopeful that we would kind of bounce out of this pretty quick. I mean, the fact is, given that we were at 700 a month ago, it actually has worked pretty quickly, but we're just not there yet. So in terms of hospitality, look, you know, hospitality and tourism have been the most profoundly impacted, along with the creative industries, I guess. Like in the creative industries, like 90% of people are not able to work. In hospitality, can I say, we have seen some just like, for me, I think like inspirational ingenuity in adapting to the way that people are accessing their customers. And it's not for everyone, and some businesses have chose to not go down that path. But for those that have, like, there are things that are available here in our own community that you wouldn't have imagined. You know, just take like the Father's Day experience just recently. Like, there were all manner of different arrangements and things on offer from our hospitality sector. And, you know, like, you can have a pot and palmer at home, and it's not the same as having it at the pub, but for some businesses, they've made the decision that it's important to maintain that connection to their customers, but also, you know, it is better on their business model and their outputs to be able to have some trade rather than none. So the third step that we hope to get to towards, you know, within a few weeks, hospitality will be able to trade. The language predominantly outdoor dining is something that we will now work with the hospitality industry on defining.
Yeah, I guess in particular also, the liquor licensing is a big impact there as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. But a lot of those rules and arrangements have been able to be cooperatively set aside. You know, if anyone's bought a bottle of wine when they were picking up their takeaway, like, that's something we weren't doing last year.
That was new.
And so yes, there's an important task now to do with local government, and I know we've got some the mayor and councillors here with us today, but also with the local government sector across the state. And so whether it's turning some footpaths into dining areas and turning some roads into footpaths. I know the City of Melbourne are doing some really great work around temporary, you know, bollards, really low cost stuff. It's not like there's a lot of traffic around at the moment because people aren't moving around so much. You know, making and creating some space. The weather's getting better, and yes, it's Ballarat and it can be chancy at the best of times. But giving people that option where their density limit might say that they can have, say 20 people, but if they can predominantly have people outside, then suddenly, you know, you're looking at churn that might be valuable. And when we were open before we went to stage 3, I know there were places in town that were doing 4 sittings for dinner, which is like, you can only imagine what it's like in the kitchen. My God, that mind boggles. But, you know, it's a very different sort of hospitality experience to what we're used to. But again, you know, until this pandemic has run its course or there is a vaccine, I think a really important part of my job and a really important part of the government's role is to help people to adapt to operating in this environment. And if that's, you know, and if we need to look at things like, you know, arrangements with councils for space, you know, blankets and braziers and umbrellas, you know, let's do it. You've seen, you know,
I think we had
done it in Rome. They've done it lots of places around the world. We're going to work out how to make it fit for us.
I think we had one council in the Grampians that I think within 14 hours of the Premier's announcement, they already had a new policy on outdoor dining. So there are ways of Ararat. So there's lots happening in that space and lots of support for small business. Yeah. I guess we had a question come in. When we started this journey, this COVID journey, the whole reason that we were doing a lot of the lockdowns was to maintain capacity within the hospital network for the influx of, respirator needs and high needs patients, which we haven't seen. And at what point does that change, and how does the CMO manage? Because it seems that whole philosophy has changed. We're no longer trying to balance the medical need. It's about, we've gone for a complete suppression
No, it hasn't. So the strategy that the National Cabinet agreed was suppression, not eradication. And that was, I wasn't in the room, but that was the decision that the governments of the Commonwealth came to. I think we can look at New Zealand, where they've had a magnificent, it was amazing, small island nation, distant from lots of parts of the world, went into a very, very severe lockdown early and long and achieved eradication and then didn't. And, so I think we should recognise that, if eradication is sort of a byproduct of if elimination is a byproduct of eradication, then that would be nice, but the objective is to get to a point where we can live with it. On Sunday, if you were watching the Premier's press conference, he talked about, I think he picked a point in time, maybe this time last year, and talked about the health system having, 1,000 people in for heart attacks and 1,000 people in for strokes, and, a whole bunch of people in for urgent cancer care, and a whole bunch of, then there's the car crash people and so on, babies being born. We need our hospitals to be able to continue to function as hospitals. And I think in some parts, and we've been fortunate here in Ballarat, but in some parts of the state, there are some parts of our health system that have been incredibly stretched.
Getting a number of questions just on you. There's been an announcement on the apprentices recovery package. Would you be able to talk just maybe briefly about that? I know personally in some of my businesses, my trainees and apprentices, some of them are in jeopardy. So I'd be interested to see what support is sitting out there.
I think this is about the announcement from last week.
Correct.
Maybe. So Working for Victoria, which is a program that I have carriage of, is so it was $500 million initial investment that substantially does wage subsidies, either in full or in part. And so we've created and funded now close to 11,000 jobs. As part of that, there's basically an online platform to match people from people looking for work with people with positions. There are a few thousand that are still being filled because they've been being created in very recent times. This is a lot of active recruitment going on. And so the announcement the other day for apprenticeships and traineeships was funding for some positions with public sector employers. So Working for Victoria has private sector organisations that have been part of it, though it has predominantly been public sector work to date because, quite frankly, the speed was the order of the day when it was first set up, and the organisations that could most quickly identify work that could be done and stood up quickly were local councils and then non-government organisations. And so I was looking at those numbers yesterday, might be about half of the funding has gone to local councils to employ people. And you will have seen some of those very early positions like the cleaning of street furniture and public spaces in Melbourne CBD was, it was pretty high profile at the time. That was one example. There's a whole lot of roles with catchment management authorities and water authorities, Parks Vic, and the likes as well, but then a whole lot of other roles with organisations like Brotherhood St Lawrence, the Jesuit Social Services, a lot of our multicultural organisations, BRMC, are in one of the partnerships for some multicultural community grants. That's community outreach work, filling some of the gaps that have been caused by volunteers not being able to go and do their usual volunteer work. So it's really many and varied, but that apprenticeship traineeship program that we announced the other day was funded through there, and their positions that have been identified by trawling through all government departments and agencies to identify where work opportunities might exist. And there'll be 6 to 12 months work for people under the age of 25.
Interesting question from my friend and colleague Alan Labasse at Fed Uni is, how can education institutions such as Fed kind of play a role in the recovery? I have to say, as a Fed alumni, I was a little bit surprised to see that Fed hadn't participated in the Upskill My Business program, which has been incredibly popular. And I encourage anybody on this call, if you haven't gone onto the Small Business Victoria website and had a look at that, huge numbers of free programs there for you and for your staff, ranging right across from 8-week certificate level programs with La Trobe to smaller ones. What kind of role can a university that's regionally based play in this recovery from your perspective?
Yeah, no, it's good to have a recovery question, because we are just about at that point. And it's, there's been so much crisis management, but a huge amount of our thinking and time and effort is going into recovery, and the recovery task is going to be enormous, as you all know. I think that the higher ed sector and the training sector are going to have a huge role to play in recovery. The economy is not going to look the same on the other side of this. And there are, so for instance, in the tech sector, in digital economy and innovation, there are organisations that cannot hire people fast enough to deal with the exponential growth that they're experiencing. And we've always had a tech skills shortage, but it's compounded now by the fact that the borders are closed and you can't just get people in from around the world. And so one of the things, again, through that Working for Victoria program, and it's a bit of a trial thing, but we're going to identify a couple of hundred people who have lost their jobs as a result of the pandemic, and put them through a short course and place them with industry, sort of properly explore how mid-career transition and training can go. And again, what I keep hearing from the business community is it's all well and good for people to have a degree or a qualification in this or that, but what I actually need is people with work-ready skills right now for what I need as my business starts hiring again. And of course, for some, they've been hiring throughout because they've been, freight or logistics or, some of the sectors that are actually busier than they usually are. So the higher ed sectors, have been meeting with, I think, most of them, almost all of them, and Gail Tierney, our Skills and Education Higher Ed Minister, is as well, and the Treasurer too. I think having courses that are very responsive to what industry needs is going to be the order of the day here. And, and again, our education department and our jobs department are completely geared to working with the higher ed sector to help get that right. But it's tips with industry that are the key.
Yeah, so firstly, thanks for your candour. I mean, I appreciate how you're very openly answering these questions, not like a politician at all. So if I can extend that to another sector, so to local government, without a doubt, the most direct level of government that we have in terms of interacting with community, what role can they play? And I'll preface it on the basis that I was on a call this week where there was a local government from the other side of Melbourne that was complaining about that their rates revenue might go down a little bit because of all the businesses going broke. And, I just wanted to throw something at the screen because, one of my businesses is down by 100%. So you really, to be worried about a 1 or 2% rate change is a little bit self-serving. I mean, how are you working with local government to roll out, funding to reactivate us in a recovery concept?
Yeah, look, personally, I'm not so much. I think there's, really looking forward to discussions with local government around how we can help businesses to be doing more trade outside. But that's quite a narrow question. Our local government minister, Sean's, I know, I'm in really regular contact with lots and lots of councils. Like, I suspect he's a bit of a workhorse, and I'd be amazed if he hasn't met all 79 by now. If he hasn't, he must be getting close to it. He came into his role same time I came into this, so just 2 months and a bit ago. Councils are coming to us with their shovel-ready projects and proposals, and councils are also thinking about where employment opportunities might exist to do more. I caught up with the City of Melbourne the other day, just by way of example, the Melbourne seabed. I don't know if many people have been there any time since March, but it's a shadow of its former self. It's so quiet and it's so sad. But as those cleaning contracts from that very initial tranche of support come to an end and there's less need for that kind of work now, they're thinking about what kind of roles that they would like to work with us to, and seek from us some support to, more of the things that will kind of support bringing people back and enlivening the city.
And I guess we're coming into council elections and caretaker, so I'm not sure we've had a question about what the impact that will be, but I guess the whole idea of caretaker is that it's just business as usual, isn't it?
We won't miss a beat on any of that sort of stuff. Caretaker just means that the councillors can't make any, as it does for us and for the feds as well, can't make any sort of big policy decisions or big funding decisions, but there's no reason at all why that would slow down anything in particular. The Mayor and Stuart and Jodie and I were all together a few weeks ago for the signing of the Small Business Friendly Council Charter. We've now, and Central Goldfields.
Correct. Yep.
A couple of weeks later, we're now well north of, I think, 50 councils out of 79 that have really run the kind of ruler over their processes in terms of business flexibility and support, things like minimising disruption when there's civic works going on, but also approval processes, streamlined approvals and things like that. So that all those things will just continue.
And faster payments is probably one of the big ones as well.
Faster payments, as we've done too.
Yeah, no, thank you, Minister. We're running out of time. I guess for me, the quote of today is that hope doesn't equal cash flow, and that really kind of hits home to most of us. Oh, yeah. Really hits home to me. While we've been on this call, the Premier has announced that there have been no new cases in regional Victoria overnight. So, I mean, that is something really to celebrate in terms of getting down from that 5 number to 0. So that's pretty cool. And look, I'll just encourage all of us, while we don't necessarily. You'll never announce a policy that we all agree with. I understand that. And while there are many of us that are still, disappointed with some of the responses, we do have a path forward now. And I'm certainly going to be doing the best in my family and in my influence circle to enact that as fast and as quickly as we can. So I'd like to say thank you to you, and thank you for your candour, and in particular, thank you to our sponsors and the continued leadership of Commerce Ballarat, of Jodie and Nick and the team. You mentioned before some of the mental health interventions that you've been making and that I've been working with you at Small Business Victoria. Commerce Ballarat are actually going to be putting one of their team members through that program. So that's wonderful. And I just continue to encourage businesses, just talk to each other. We've done the whole are you okay individually in our friendship circles. Let's keep doing it with our businesses, with our suppliers, and also with our customers, because we will get through this. It's going to be a very different landscape, and the glimmer of hope for me is that Victoria will have the biggest boom it has ever seen when we get through the other side of this. We've all just got to make it to that point. So, Minister, thank you for your time today, and all power to you. I know you're working long hours like all of us, And thank you to everyone who's joined us today.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart, and thanks, Jodie and the board and sponsors and everyone. I'll have a proper look at the Q&A comments. If there are any individual matters, you know how to reach out to my office or contact us through Jodie. We're in pretty regular contact, so I've got a real-time sense of how our own local business community feel. And again, you know, there's no guidebook for how to handle a pandemic. Everyone's doing the best they can, and you know, we thank you for your you know, just your resilience, your creativity, your you know, your efforts to date, and like the, you know, the very big sacrifices that you've made as business people, but also just as members of this community as well. It is working, it is helping, and we will get there. So thank you.
Minister, thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.